Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. This show is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awake or awakening people. To check out the hundreds of interviews already done and various other things on the site, go to batgap.com. There's a donate button there if you'd like to support our efforts. My guest today is Peter Fenner. I've had the pleasure of listening to Peter's book, Radiant Mind, for the last week and got through pretty much the whole thing. And it's funny, Peter, as I'll explain who you are in a minute, but it's funny, as I was listening to the book, I really felt like we were brothers from another mother, in a sense, because, I don't know if you've heard that expression, but I felt such a resonance with everything you were saying. Didn't really have much to disagree with, which doesn't always happen. Sometimes when I listen to teachers or read their books, I'm a little critical and say, I think that point's a little off or whatever, to my own understanding. But I just felt a lot of resonance with what you were saying, and it's ironic in a way because we come from very different traditions. You know, you're from a Buddhist tradition, I have more of a Hindu tradition background, although I don't know if you consider yourself a Buddhist, but I don't consider myself a Hindu. But in any case, I could have written the book myself, in a sense, if I were as good a writer, because of what you're saying. And just about everything you said, for me, was like a springboard to an interesting discussion. But for the most part, I was, in fact, not at all was I taking notes. I was cutting the grass, riding my bicycle, doing all the things I usually do, and that's how I managed to listen to all this stuff. But I have a feeling that we're just going to hit it off and have a great conversation and cover all kinds of ground. And as we've been doing recently, this is a call-in, not a call-in, it's live stream show. And if people listening live go to the upcoming interviews page under future interviews on batgap.com and then scroll down, they'll see a form where they can submit questions that I will probably ask during the interview. So let me just backtrack a little bit and read a little bit of your bio here. So Peter he's in Australia at the moment as we speak. He's a leader in the Western adaptation of Buddhist wisdom. He's a pioneer in the new field of non-dual psychotherapy. He was a celibate monk in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions for 9 years. He has a Ph.D. in the philosophical psychology of Mahayana Buddhism and has held teaching positions at universities in Australia and the U.S. He's taught workshops at Naropa University, the California Institute for Integral Studies, Omega Institute, and other centers, and given invited presentations at JFK University, Saybrook College, Stanford Medical School, Columbia University, and internationally. I'll just read this one last paragraph. Peter's way of teaching is known for its dynamic and engaging deconstruction of all fixed frames of reference that block entry to unconditioned awareness, and for the purity and depth of natural, uncontrived silence that emerges in his work. He also has a unique capacity for sharing the skills and states of his transmission in a way that others can easily understand and begin to replicate in the non-dual transmission. And if I had to summarize you, Peter, I would say, having listened to that book and also some other interviews and stuff you did, that I found that there was a great deal of honesty, and I guess I could use the word practicality, but there's something realistic about the way you talk about spirituality. A lot of times people, I feel, have failed to distinguish between intellectual understanding and direct experience, and they end up getting, immersing themselves in books and teachings and getting very conversant with an intellectual understanding, and then beginning to espouse that and talk about it on perhaps even as a teacher or on chat groups and so on, but they don't realize that what they are really alluding to with their understanding is an experience that can be quite profoundly different and more rich than any sort of intellectual understanding could be. And I really got the sense as I was listening to you that you had a realistic understanding of that distinction, and also a realistic appreciation of the vast range of possibilities for human spiritual evolution. A sense that it can really go very far more than many people realize. So those are 2 points that resonate with me a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate that introduction. Rick, very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, well, the realism for me is pretty important. I mean, the way to be realistic is just to watch how we are evolving ourselves and like take this as the benchmark, that not being seduced by other people's stories, other people's paths, not by the literature, which a lot of it, I mean, people are living into ideals and fantasies. I think if we accept that we have that capacity to fantasize, I mean, we think it would be just so great if we could achieve that state of beyond suffering as quickly as possible. And so many people that I share with in different ways, they're asking, is that possible in this life? Can I really achieve that? And, maybe not, but historically it was still a pretty rare occurrence to achieve in this life that state of just being in bliss consciousness no matter what's happening, because life can throw at us so many different and difficult situations. So
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of what I might call the crucifixion test. I mean, it's easy to be
mm,
in bliss consciousness under ideal circumstances, perhaps, but what if you find yourself in Christ's circumstances? Did he remain in bliss consciousness? I would like to think he actually did, given the maturity of his spiritual evolution, but I don't know. And that might seem totally contradictory, because how could somebody be in bliss consciousness when they're being crucified? But perhaps you can probably answer that question and elaborate a little bit on what we mean by bliss consciousness. But in your own case, I know you were talking about when you had a ruptured disc in your spine or something, and you were in excruciating pain. And you readily admitted that there was no question of bliss consciousness at that point. It was pretty much blotto
right.
by the pain. And you had people saying to you, "Oh, Peter, that there's no person to whom this is happening," and that's not very helpful advice under such circumstances. So we kind of have to be realistic with whatever actual stage of development we may have reached.
Yeah, exactly. How I see it is that when we've got an opportunity to do the profound work of resting in pure awareness, which sometimes is bliss consciousness. That's interesting. For me, it's not always accompanied by sourceless bliss. Sometimes it's there. Like it's you saying, well, what name can I put on this? Something is happening. There's some really subtle, like affective dimension. Well, the only word I can put on it is bliss, but it's not what I call somatic bliss, because it's not coming from a source. If I say, okay, so where's the source of it? It's not coming from like some exquisite music. It's not by being touched in a particular way. It just does not have a source, the same as non-dual awareness. Where is it coming from? Nowhere and everywhere. So when we have that opportunity, we just take it. For me, that's the practice, that when it arises, just enjoying it in a way, even though it's unconditioned. We're conditioning, the mind stream's conditioned, we're conditioning ourselves to have more of this.
Sure.
So so that's the big thing. And then when it's not here, it's not here. And we can appreciate that it's this really weird thing that we can't lose it because there's nothing to lose. We can even think that. Sometimes that takes us straight back into it. What is it that I've lost? Oh, wow, you can't lose this. And then we're back here. Sometimes we think that thought and it doesn't sort of dig deep enough. We think, but you can't lose this. But it doesn't get into it because the conditioning's got its own power.
Yeah. Some people don't like the talk of progressive stages of development of bliss or anything else. They say, well, reality is what it is. How can it be progressive? But I would respond that it is what it is. Fine, but our experience of it can be quite a different matter, and that can be progressive. That can evolve and mature and develop and so on. Wouldn't you agree to that?
Yeah. So, for example, if you take something like depth, which is a dimension of unconditioned awareness that I talk about, when we're here, there's no depth to it. There's no directionality. There's no superficiality. There's no depth. We can't like dig into it more because it's non-dual. So it's beyond those dualistic structures. But there is a sense that we can integrate this, which has no depth, more deeply into our conditioned being. In other words, we can, over the, let's say 5 or 10 years after working with this, we can be present to difficult circumstances, stuff that's, triggering emotions, physical pain, and it's not producing a perturbation. We're still fully, richly immersed in this.
There's a Vedic metaphor in which they talk about conditioning, and they say that a deeply conditioned nervous system, very kind of deeply kind of ingrained, habituated nervous system is like stone. And you try to make a mark in the stone. It's a little hard to make the mark. In other words, experience isn't very deep. But whatever mark you do make stays in the stone. And then a less conditioned nervous system is more like sand. You can actually make a deeper mark, deeper experience, but it gets washed away a little bit faster. And a less conditioned nervous system is like water, real deep mark, but it disappears. And the least conditioned is more like air. You can just any depth of impression, and yet there's no lasting impression. So you hear people talk about, and you can elaborate that, they might have some experience and it has some deep impact, and a minute later they're back to equilibrium.
No, I like that metaphor. I haven't heard it before. But yeah, that's great. Lovely.
And wouldn't you say, having been a practitioner for probably decades now of whatever you've been practicing, that, if you look back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, there has been a steady progression in terms of the depth or clarity of your experience, and also the stability of it in terms of its not being perturbable.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the type of time frame to look at things in as well. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and so on. Because within that, we can be confronted by stuff that's happening, death of a loved one, or just stuff that's, really complex for us to be dealing with. So anything shorter than sort of 6 months is a bit deceptive. So someone to begin and think, okay, so like, where am I going to be in 6 months? Great. The main point is that whatever the experience is, we're always building a resource if we're working with this, even though life over a shorter time might be more challenging just because of the circumstances. But sure, over that longer term, for sure, that there's a stabilizing, and I think particularly a more ready access to this. You don't have to go through all the complexities, because we're talking about making the journey from being identified with some conditioning, let's say caught up in some conditioning, attraction and aversion, through to here, and we're talking about making the journey thousands and thousands of times over decades. That's how it happens. Thousands of times we make it. We go to a teaching, and you're in and out of it maybe 20, 30, 40 times. Resting in it for 5 minutes, then caught up in some belief system, and then returning to it. So it's just the more times we're making the journey, the easier it is, and the more automatic and effortless it becomes.
I'll give you another metaphor. In India, they used to dye cloth, and maybe they still do, by dipping cloth in colored dye and then taking it out and bleaching it in the sun. And it would lose most of its color, but to a certain extent it would retain the color. And then they'd dip it again and then bleach it again, and dip it and bleach it, and keep doing that until eventually it became color fast. It wouldn't lose its color even in the bright sunlight, no matter how long you left it there. So I think it's just a metaphor to illustrate what you were just saying.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm dwelling on this point to start out with is that, as I said, I like the fact that you seem to speak from your own experience and not just sort of go off into intellectual abstractions that don't pertain to your experience. And this has been my experience over the decades, the kind of thing you're just describing, the progressive development. And I'm always a little puzzled when I hear people saying, give up the search, or you don't need to do anything because you're already enlightened, and stuff like that. And I just think they're just kind of in dreamland. Or maybe they know something I don't know, but that's not the way my experience has been.
Right. Yeah, what happens for me often when people are sharing like that, I think, are you telling me something? Or it seems to me that you're telling me something. And if that's the intention, you're telling me something, it's conceptual, it's content. It's not what this is, which is non-conceptual awareness.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've probably clarified that point enough that what we're discussing here and what spirituality in general is really all about is non-conceptual. The conceptual is kind of like the icing on the cake, but the important thing is the actual experience. I mean, you can stand out on the sidewalk and read the menu at a restaurant and get a concept of what it might be like to eat there, but that's a far cry from actually going in and eating as far as deriving any kind of enjoyment or nutrition is concerned.
Yeah.
Good. So, as I said, I really enjoyed your book, Radiant Mind, and I see someone sent in some questions about it, which I'll ask. But why don't you give us a kind of let's sort of walk us through some of the main points of your book as they come to your mind, and we'll just kind of stop and discuss these points as we go along.
Okay. Well, the book and what I offer generally is what's sometimes called the result level approach. So I sort of assume at the beginning that there's nothing that we need to do. We can be here without needing to do anything because this is acausal. It's not caused. This, as pure awareness, it's not the product of anything, so there's nothing that we have to do or not do to just be here. So that's the beginning assumption. So I come in, and so often I'll say, so sort of, why don't we just begin at the end? Because often what I find is that if people are attending a workshop, somehow they think they have to do a lot of work and they can really only get the goodies at the end. You actually see it. It's like in the last 2 or 3 hours, people's mindset changes and they think, okay, I've done enough work. Now I'd better get what I'm here for. So I say, well, if we sort of start at the end, then we can just do more of this. We can just be in the place where there's no gap, where nothing is missing. So that's the sort of assumption that's always there in the background, that nothing more needs to happen. We don't have to, there's no practice, that this is not about knowing anything. We can just be here in this state of completion. And we can check it if we're complete by, for example, asking a question like, can I enhance this? Can I make it better? And make what better? No, I mean, there's nothing here to make better. So just checking that it's the real, pure, non-dual state. So that's the sort of beginning assumption. And then I go back as much as is necessary to connect with people. It's like going on a journey with people. A little bit like, imagine, going for a walk in the mountains. And so you've got a group of people, and I sort of know how to get there, where the path is and how to do it, how to get to the peak. And then a lot of the work is working out what I call the gradient. If you're trying to go up too steeply, being too radical, you lose people. It's just, what is this? What is he talking about? This is impossible. I don't get it. But then if you're not, if the gradient's just flat, you're wasting people's time. You're just engaging in stories and intellectual stuff like you were talking about. So a radiant mind is just, it's like a broad program that's pretty secular in how it's presented, so it can appeal to people of no faith, of different faiths. It people can be beginners, they can be mature practitioners. It really does pick up a lot of different people, and then it just works in as refined a way as possible to produce as much resting in awareness as possible. That's the name of the game.
There's something paradoxical about what you just said, though, and in a way it might sound like it contradicts what we have just spent the first 15 minutes talking about, which is that if a person comes, let's say, to a retreat or any situation, and they are very stressed, very conditioned, kind of all keyed up, been through a lot, and to take an extreme example, going to a prison or something, and people have led pretty hellacious lives in many cases, and really seen some tough and done some tough things. And do you just say to them, well, this can't be improved? I mean, this is what it is, and how can it be made any better? It seems to me, on the one hand, there is an element to our experience which is non-changing, however dimly we experience that, and there are degrees of clarity with which it can be experienced. So that in and of itself can't be enhanced or improved, but our appreciation of it, the clarity with which we experience it, and the degree to which we can embody it, knows no end of possible enhancement.
Yeah, that's how I see it.
Okay.
If we are, for some reason, I think that we are infinitely complex and rich. So yeah, there's no end to the depth to which this can be embodied. But no, that's an important point that you're making. You don't present this to someone when there's a big disconnection, big discontinuity between where they are, because then they would invalidate this priceless state, the non-dual state. So no, in the type of situation that you're describing, I would move more in the direction of, so yes, like life really has been really stressful, even just a few minutes ago. And maybe in, half an hour, it's going to reconstitute, it's going to come back in that stressful way. But right now, we do have 30 minutes. We do have one day, whatever it is, together. So let's make the optimum opportunity of this time. Let's really bring to ourselves, it's like a gift to ourselves, a gift to consciousness. What's the optimum possibility? Yeah, all that suffering is happening. So what's better to just bring in something fresh and peaceful and serene and open and spacious, or to just process all that stuff, just to let all the stories come out. Or we could just start to get into, but when this finishes, it's going to be we could do that. But then we're devaluing the possibility of this moment. So it would be introducing it like that, rather than, with that more radical non-dual language.
Yeah. So it's like, if a room is really dark, and maybe there's some people in the room and you're talking to them, but you don't say, all right, let's analyze this darkness. Let's talk about the darkness. Let's dwell in the darkness. You say, oh, let's just flick on a light, and then all of a sudden all this darkness that was such a problem is nowhere to be found. So right. I think what you're trying to say is that you do your best to point out to people that even in the midst of, a difficult life, there is some still quiet center that can be detected if you stop a moment to detect it, and that can be cultured and strengthened in one's experience. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, and I think another important point is sort of taking stock of the fact that we will suffer in the future. At least it's very, very likely that we will. So then we can sort of put that to the side, because often people come in, I'm wanting to get the thing that will make it impossible to ever suffer in the future. To which I often respond, well, just forget that. Just just accept that as very likely you will. And now what can we do now that we've said, okay, that will probably happen? Do I have to be suffering now? Well, no, not necessarily.
Yeah. and you can kind of get a toehold in that which is beyond suffering, and
Yeah,
hopefully strengthen your stand in that as you go along.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what would you say, that was a good introduction to your book. So, what would you say was the next kind of main point that comes to mind?
The main point that's here for me is that we can't know this, because that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, in doing the work I'm doing, often I see it as two mountains that we either need to go through, drill through, go around. It really doesn't matter how you do it. See that they're not there. And they are the mountains of needing to be doing something. What do I need to do to get there? And how do I know it? And so what we're dissolving are those mountains. There's nothing to know and nothing to do. So in a sense, radiant mind is dissolving the notion of being on the path.
Okay.
So then, yeah.
Well, go ahead. You can finish.
Well, then when we're not on the path, it's not like we achieve a goal, but then there's no more struggle. There's no way, there's no further step to take.
Okay, so nothing to do and nothing to know. So let's pick those apart a little bit. So the first one, nothing to do. How do you reconcile that with your own history as a Buddhist practitioner, in which you probably did hundreds and thousands of hours of meditation practice? Was that kind of a non-doing, and that's how you can kind of say that, oh yes, I did that, but at the same time there's nothing to do?
Well, the nothing to do that we're talking about here is not like doing nothing. It's really doing the no thing. It's doing it's doing this. It doesn't mean just like giving up. I mean, that's a misinterpretation that I feel people can extract from some non-dual teachings approaches, that it's just like you walk away and just whatever, you just do what you're doing and do nothing.
Live life, crack a beer, watch the football game. There's nothing to do. I'm there.
Right.
Yeah.
This doing nothing it's a non-doing, but it's doing the no thing. It's doing pure awareness, like minute after minute, just resting here effortlessly. So it's a profound not doing. It's not the opposite of action. So we could say it's non-doing rather than not doing.
Okay, I think go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so going back to my practice, I mean, I really wouldn't be able to analyze it, but it does make sense to me, the Zen notion that we have to do as much as we've done in order to realize that we didn't have to do that in order to be here.
Yeah.
And without doing that we didn't need to do, we wouldn't be here.
It's very kind of paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, you read that over and over again. People say when they wake up, when they attain enlightenment, so to speak, they realize that they always were that. How could they have been anything other than that? How can the reality have not been real? What is that verse in the Gita? It says, the unreal has no being, the real never ceases to be. But paradoxically, as you say, we go through all these rigmaroles in order to come to that realization.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I like to think of the sun and clouds analogy. Like, the sun doesn't have to do anything to shine, but if there's clouds, then the clouds might obscure the view of the sun for those who are on the other side of them. So maybe there needs to be some wind or something to blow the clouds away, and then the sun is found, it's always been shining. Analogies have their limitations, but it helps to illustrate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, I think in this work, that's part of what we're looking for in working with a more strictly non-dual approach or results oriented approach, that we're just looking for the way that we create something needs to happen before, just that structure. Mm-hmm. That's how we get on the path. The clouds need to disperse, and then, or I need to do more practice, or I need to go back and fix this part of my life up, or I need whatever it is. And then, of course, we just prolong being here. We can't be here if we think it happens in the future.
Well, I'm going to keep picking you on this with you because, on the other hand, if you're deeply conditioned and attached and bound up in things, you may be here, but there's a lot of conditioning that's running your life, and it may be that after 10, 20 years of some sort of discipline or practice, your future, from the current perspective, ends up being a lot brighter than your present because you've undergone a lot of transformation, right?
For sure. But getting into that story, right, thinking, contextualizing what you're doing in the moment in that way. It's not saying that's what you're doing because you were looking at it more retrospectively. But if that's what we're doing, we're thinking, so I do this and it's sort of working, and then it's going to get even better. I'm going to get this resource that will be more like, solidly integrated in me. That's not resting in awareness. Like that's you're in time. So that's again part of what I'm looking for. Are we in time? In the construction that's in a construction that's in time, how it's going to be in the future. The other option is to not be in time, not be, the past is there, the future is there as whatever we think it may be, but this is here in its purity. And this is, we can't say what this is. There are all the labels that have been applied to it. And this is the ultimate state, because when we're here, the great thing is we don't need anything. That's what it is. We're here. And someone comes and says, oh, look, Peter, well, first, what do you need? I don't need anything. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. Wouldn't you like more of it? It's just, again, it doesn't compute. Would you like, $1,000?
Sure, why not?
Here right now. Why? What for? It's sort of, if you leave, if it gets left there, yes. If it doesn't, whether there is no difference.
When you say non-doing, is that similar to the notion, like, breathing is kind of a non-doing? You don't have to think about it; it just happens spontaneously. And so are you saying that the living pure awareness, or whatever we want to call it, should be so natural that, it's just being lived without our having to think about it or hold on to it or make a fuss about it? It just kind of gets to be a second nature sort of thing. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so it is natural meditation. So it doesn't have to have the form of meditation at all. It's this is natural meditation. The way to check that out is there any value to be derived in this moment from meditating? No, that's not evident. That's not obvious to me at all. Why would I meditate in this moment?
Well, you're talking to me, you better not meditate.
Right. Whatever. But, there's no need, because the fruition of meditation has happened. Through the resting in awareness. So it's natural meditation, or another phrase that's used, the meditation that's not meditation. It's like it's happening without needing to do it. Just descended on us. Just come to us.
And yet the Buddha was said to have meditated a couple hours a day for the rest of his life after attaining enlightenment. So why, if that's true, why did he do that? Because he was already enlightened.
Yeah, but I doubt that he was sitting down and thinking, so I've got to meditate now.
Well, he may have done a sitting meditation of some kind. He may have just sat and...
But he may not have been able to do that.
Maybe.
It's not as though we become, totally unconditioned and don't need to eat and do this and dress and what have you. So, people who've been meditating a lot, in some form, they connect with the non-dual, but they still sit a lot. That's
because it's like a habit.
They're used to doing it, to just being sort of pretty immobile and watching awareness, watching the mind. But it's not something that's being done to produce a particular or an anticipated goal.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. People who know me well are probably thinking at this point, oh yeah, Rick is just sort of arguing his particular obsession, which is that he's been meditating for a long, long time, and he's kind of defending the fact that he still does this practice. And I would admit to that in a way, but I also have to be true to my own experience, which differs a little bit from what you're saying in that I do find that every time I meditate, I derive very profound benefit from it. It's refreshing, enlivening, and as over the years, it continues to sort of take me deeper, so to speak, into the very same thing that I'm already experiencing, but there's greater depth and clarity that seems to continue to unfold. So.
Yeah, for sure. Because earlier where I was talking about creating the optimal opportunity in the moment, that includes creating the optimal conditions. So, a retreat environment is an attempt to create great conditions for accessing the non-dual. A component of that is meditation, like at home in a retreat environment in which you're effectively sitting down and saying, okay, so this time is for something different. This is not for just getting engaged in all the projects. This is not for thinking and planning what I'll be doing for the rest of the day, next month. I'm sitting down because this is an opportunity for awareness. All right. So that's the opportunity here. Yeah. Okay. So awareness. What is that? And also the other opportunity, of course, is who's meditating.
Right.
All right. So I've done this thing. I'm here. Who is here? Right. Presencing what? So for sure, meditation has been shown to be one of the structures that lends itself to really supporting accessing awareness.
Yeah, and like I think you said earlier, it's kind of if done in a certain way, it's sort of a natural thing, like eating or sleeping or the drinking water or the various things we need to do. It can become that kind of integral to one's life, and I'm not sort of trying to argue it as a universal practice necessarily. Other people might find other things more useful. I'm just sort of playing with you here on this first thing you said. You said two things: nothing to do, nothing to know. About this nothing to do point, when just about every spiritual tradition in the world has all kinds of things one can do to apparently progress, become more pure, become more clear, whatever they offer. And so that it can be confusing for people when they juxtapose a statement like there's nothing to do with traditions with which they may be familiar.
So we should really change the phrase from, I should have introduced it differently, and be speaking about doing nothing, perhaps, rather than nothing to do. And how do we do nothing? The no thing. How do we do contentlessness?
Yeah.
How do we do selflessness? How do we do the Atma Vidya? How do we do beyond the personal self? One of the best ways to do it is, you sit down, right? Already we're meditating, right? We sit down and we think, okay, so how do I do that? Where is the self? We just pick a word, whatever it is. Consciousness itself, centerlessness. What is that? Where is that? Who is doing this? Doing what? So those are things that, right? Those pointers happen much more easily, obviously, in that container of what we would call meditation, because from the outside, that's what it looks like. People can come to a workshop, and I'll sometimes point out, I'll say, so are you meditating? I say, no, we're not meditating. But then I just note that if someone from the outside were to open the door, because there's a lot of silence in my retreats, people just resting, eyes open, eyes closed. Someone opened the door, they would say, they're meditating. This is a meditation retreat, meditation class.
Yeah, there's that old saying, it takes a thorn to remove a thorn, and I guess you could consider meditation in some of its forms to be a doing which takes you out of doing. It's a reduction of doing, less and less, doing less and less. And yet, you know, you're still doing something as you retreat from doing. It's kind of like if a person's standing in the middle of a great big mud puddle and they want to know how to get out of the mud puddle, and somebody at the edge of the puddle says, well, take a step. And then he might say, well, yeah, but you're asking me to put my foot in the mud again. Yeah, but just take a step, you know, and then take another step. And at a certain point, you're out of the puddle. So.
Yeah, exactly. And then the important point is to be aware of the way a practice can be doing what you're saying, undoing the conditioning, like moving us through to awareness, or the way that a practice can be conditioning us, which is not the intention of a practice.
Right.
The practice isn't intended to just like really embed a need, a necessity to forever do that practice. It's meant to release us, to bring nirvana, moksha.
Yep. Good. So what the other part of it that you said is not knowing. And you hear that a fair amount. And yet you also, you know, there are all kinds of scriptures one can read and you can learn all kinds of things. And you know, so-called enlightened people seem to be very wise and sometimes very articulate, and they say profound things. It seems like they know a lot. So play with that, and you know, what are you saying when you mean not knowing?
What I mean in saying not knowing is pointing out that this awareness isn't an object of knowledge, so we can't know this. It's not. It's no more complicated than that.
Yeah. Could you say it knows itself in some way, or is that even too dualistic to say?
Well, what I do at this point, when I hear you or someone say something like that, can this know itself? Can awareness know itself? I just look at what my mind does with that. That's the only significant thing. If my mind starts to do something with that, then it's not the phrase is not doing what I think it's intended to do, which is to take me beyond the mind. In fact, it's giving me something to think about. This can know itself. Is this the same thing? How does it know itself? As a philosopher, I could get quite. I know that you can. In fact, there are schools. Some schools built on the fact that awareness is self-knowing, and others refute that. It can become a big thing. I'm just looking for how do we disengage the mind so that we can presence this. So I just try and keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah. And in speaking in terms of our own experience, you know, I think we both have some experiential familiarity with what we're discussing here, but it's not like something we know the way I know, you know, what my ring is made of, or I know some mathematical formula, or I know my wife's name or something. It's not a subject-object relationship kind of thing. Would you say that it's the knower, radiant awareness, and that the knower that can know this, that, or the other thing, but to know itself, what does it have to do?
Yeah, it's the knower that can't be found.
Because it can't step apart from itself and say, "Oh, here I am over here," because then it wouldn't.
Right, because then the subject is being objectified.
Right.
So we're continuing to look for, like, the ground of subjectivity, like where the knowing is coming from, who the knower is. And if we know anything about that, that's no longer the knower.
There's something actually that relates to both these points then, the doing and the knowing. And it's actually reflected in a question that someone named Elizabeth had sent in. She said, is what you call radiant mind equivalent to sahaja samadhi? I'm not sure if you're familiar with all those samadhi terms, and I'm not either. There are all these different flavors of samadhi. But if we think of what we're talking about, I mean, ordinarily the mind is agitated, right? And to a certain extent, and the attention is directed outwards. And what we're talking about here is a kind of a settling down, so as well, are you familiar with the Yoga Sutras? The second verse in the Yoga Sutras says that yoga is the cessation of fluctuations of the mind.
Chitta.
Yeah, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, and then the seer rests in the self, or the knower rests in itself. That's what we're describing here. So how would you describe what you're saying in terms of some of those? I know you had a Buddhist background, but in terms of some of those more traditional Hindu terms, I guess the Buddhists have the same things. They talk about samadhi and so on, don't they also?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's just radiant mind is just one way of using one phrase to talk about the co-arising of the conditioned and the unconditioned, the co-arising of awareness and the contents of awareness, the co-arising inseparability of emptiness and appearances, emptiness and form, which is the sahaja state. It's not emptiness as a state that's disconnected from the conditioned reality. It's this weird recognition that this is unconditioned and really totally inseparable from all of these conditions, the shapes, the forms, the sounds, this infinitely complex matrix that can be subdivided probably in so many ways, and that this that has no content can't be differentiated. I mean, it's impossible to, this shouldn't be, it's like, in some ways it shouldn't be like this. This should be impossible, what's happening right now, but it isn't. Just the way that awareness that has no content can interface. I mean, that's not even the right word because there's no interface, but that it can interface with the contents of awareness. I mean, I'm never going to have an answer for that. That for me is, like in Buddhism, an unanswerable question. It's not formally one of the unanswerable questions, but it is unanswerable.
It's a beautiful point, actually. The mystery of awareness being able to interact or interface with stuff. And the way I understand it is that the stuff with which awareness appears to be interacting or interfacing is actually also awareness. And so that awareness is interacting with itself, and through the process of doing that gives rise to the apparent diversity of subject-object relationships, forms, and phenomena. But even from the standpoint of contemporary physics, at least as some physicists understand it, if you analyze anything deeply enough, you get right down to that bedrock of the non-dual state. And that thing, which appears to be a thing, is nothing other than that non-dual state. So it's a fascinating thing to consider. I mean, if the non-dual state is the ultimate reality, then can there actually be, I mean, there can be subsidiary realities, we can say, all the forces and fields and matter and so on that comprise the universe. But what are they essentially, other than that non-dual state having somehow gotten excited or perturbed? But, look at it more closely, and it never did get excited or perturbed. There's saints like Ramana Maharshi and others who say, nothing ever happened, actually. It just appears to have happened. The string was never a snake. It just was mistaken to be one.
Yeah.
Well, let me throw a question at you, because I kind of left you stumped there.
I don't have, nothing's happening.
One thing I find interesting is that you define yourself as a non-dual psychotherapist, or you have a non-dual approach to psychotherapy. Is non-dual, and I'm not very familiar with the Buddhist tradition, is non-duality really a lively term in Buddhist thinking, or are you kind of a hybrid between Buddhist tradition and Advaita, and that's why you use the term non-dual a lot?
I really appreciate the question, because many people don't realize how thoroughly the term non-duality is used in Mahayana Buddhism in particular, but it's used again and again in anything that is coming out of what's called the prajna parameter, the perfection of wisdom tradition. So Zen, Dzogchen, Madhyamika, Mahamudra, all of the central texts, you go to any glossary, you'll find non-duality. So it's an integral part of those traditions, and a non-duality that is essentially the same as non-duality. In which the language of contradiction, neither this nor that, the language that you find in Advaita. Interesting thing. Probably the closest, just in terms of language, is Gaudapada from Advaita, who some people thought was a crypto-Buddhist, a Buddhist. Yeah, but no, it's embedded in Buddhism. You also have the notion of upaya, skillful methods. This, great diversity of methods, all leading to the non-dual state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in a way what has supported this diffusion of methods and diffusion of different non-dual approaches.
Okay. Yeah, it would stand to reason, I should hope, that non-duality would be there as much in Buddhism as anywhere, because obviously, I mean, I'm of a mind that if you got together the founders of all these great traditions, Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad, and put them in a room together, they would all describe a common experience that they had just spoken about in different languages, in different cultures. But there's really, what is it, the incredible string band sang, light that is one though the lamps be many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, going back to what we were saying about meditation, I think there's a certain point that we're just taken through into the non-dual. For a while it's efforting and mindfulness, or just observing what is awareness, like deconstructive inquiry, unfindability, self-inquiry, pointing out whatever it is. Then it's seeming to require something from our side, but then it's like when you really are close to awareness, it just draws us in.
Yeah.
And then you get that natural release and that deconstruction, the dissolving of thoughts, and just the play of awareness.
Yeah. That draws us in point is nice. I mean, we started talking about in the very beginning, we started talking about bliss, right? And it would seem that the mind would naturally be drawn toward bliss if given the opportunity. I mean, if you and I are talking like this and then some beautiful music started to play over here, our attention would just kind of be attracted to it, because the mind has this natural tendency to seek a field of greater happiness. And, it seems almost perplexing in a way that all these traditions speak of the blissful nature of reality and Satchitananda and the bliss of the self and all that stuff. And yet we are kind of estranged from it, you know. It would seem that we would just sort of sink like a stone into that bliss. And yet,
and yet, given the conducive opportunities and elegant instructions, elegant ways of doing it, that is what happens. You people just see the opportunity, and you can just feel them, just go into these real samadhi states that are really just so nourishing, because they're like just giving our nervous system a different message. They're giving our nervous system the message that, yes, we are capable of generating great bliss, mahasukha, within ourselves as a function of consciousness and our nervous system.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking neurobiologically, neurochemically, I'm sure you've heard of neuroplasticity, where the brain can actually be sculpted through experiences like that, and all the various chemicals that one could hope to take, as a drug in order to elicit some kind of response. Our own body manufactures those if we learn how to, and can manufacture them in greater abundance if we know how to use that instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Someone asked here, Elizabeth again. I have a bunch of questions from her, and maybe others will be sending in some questions. But let's try to nail down a definition of enlightenment. Her question is enlightenment really anything other than resting as awareness? That is, in the nature, in the innermost nature of mind with stability. Would that be a good working definition of enlightenment?
See, when you're asking someone who's versed in the Buddhist tradition, particularly Mahayana Buddhism, what's enlightenment, you're going to get a different answer, because than if you ask someone in, let's say, the Advaita tradition, Sufism or Taoism, or whatever other non-dual traditions, because a distinction is made between enlightenment and nirvana, enlightenment and personal freedom.
What's the difference?
Difference is personal freedom is sometimes called realizing the profound, which is the profound empty nature of mind. It's really what I am offering in Radiant Mind, and what I guess I would say is a path that I feel that, in a lifetime you can do something with it, you can get somewhere with it. It's accessing, becoming more and more, firstly recognizing, and then becoming more familiar with awareness, centerlessness, pure awareness. So that's reaching a state in which it's like this mind stream, who I am, who I connect myself with being, that I have reached a state of fulfillment, contentment, that there's nowhere further to go. It's like the work's done. This is it. In this moment, at least, we can regress from that and think we've lost it and so on. But in this moment, it's complete. Enlightenment is this, what you referred to, I think, at least how I understood what you're saying. It's this, the possibility that we are infinite in some way at the conditioned level, that I'm not just like a skin encapsulated body with a pretty small mind that can become liberated, but in some way I am infinitely complex, and that the awareness can be deepened, that it's like, I mean, it's so out there, enlightenment, relative to moksha or nirvana. It's so out there. It's like the macrocosm and the microcosm, becoming one. It's more like it's becoming divine. Enlightenment is part of Tantra, for example, and the practice of deity yoga. So in contrast to the profound, it's called the extensive or the expansive. So it has this notion of expansion to include or infuse. Somehow we become the consciousness that infuses the universe. That would probably be the best and perhaps the only way I can describe it at the moment.
Okay.
Without it starting to sound like sort of Buddhist theology or something.
Yeah. And maybe we're, extrapolating beyond our direct experience but I suppose it's it's good to define our terms so that we're on the same page in terms of what we're talking about, and so I would have thought that in Buddhism enlightenment is just the English word for moksha or nirvana, but what you seem to be saying is that those are kind of, in a way, more preliminary or fundamental, and that enlightenment is kind of even more glorious or profound or expansive or something than those.
Yeah, that's how it's understood. Yeah, it's like the first thing you get under your belt is moksha, nirvana.
Right.
Because then, how can you be a become a cosmic contribution to others, to the universe. First, you've got to get your own liberation handled. So you sort of go, you go to preliminary school and get that out the way, and then you go for this deepening through your own internal structure, and then this cosmic vision in which the subject object isn't playing out. You're not just a unique body mind, but somehow connected with the cosmos.
Okay, so based on what you've just said, let me just summarize it to see if I understand it. What you're saying is that moksha or nirvana would be sort of a realization of oneself as pure awareness, and resting in that state of pure awareness, but not necessarily an appreciation of that pure awareness permeating the entire, or containing within it the entire universe. But enlightenment would be that, with the latter, that there's a much greater wholeness which is kind of subsumed, both relative and absolute within its.
Yeah, I appreciate the way that you're describing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Another question from Elizabeth. Elizabeth is conducting this interview. Well, we've kind of covered this one. Let me know if there's anything more you want to say about it. She said, what is the role of various sadhanas in relation to simply resting in and as the nature of mind? And I think you may have done it pretty well in terms of one can do all sorts of things to eventually arrive at the realization that one isn't doing or doesn't need to, or doesn't need to have done anything. But is there any more point you'd like to say on that?
Just that, you'd like to pick a sadhana that at some point has you asking the question, who's doing this?
Right.
That would be good.
Not one that you're just going to kind of grind away at endlessly.
Yeah, right.
Okay, good. This is an interesting question. Is something like confidence necessary in order to rest as awareness? And is this confidence emotional? In other words, a sense of being capable, worthy, deserving, or is it cognitive, based upon just a clear understanding of our true nature being nothing other than pure awareness? And I guess I would just add to that question: does one need to sort of be emotionally healthy or mature or integrated, as well as mentally capable and clear, in order to rest as pure awareness? Or can one be sort of flawed in one or another of these dimensions and yet still rest as pure awareness?
Yeah, sure. I think we see that again and again, that there are no preconditions. So you can have someone who looks, really healthy. You could put them through actually psychometric testing, and they come out, a really healthy individual who, lives life well, and they're responsible and so on, and confident. Doesn't necessarily give them a basis for letting go of self-identity, letting go of everything, and being no one, going nowhere, and being awareness. And you can have someone who's like, the whole thing's a bit shaky, who I am and what's what, and life doesn't look, particularly together, and have a history of even some like psychological imbalance, disturbance, for who has ready access to this. So this that's possible because there are no preconditions. And certainly going back to India and Tibet, I mean, you didn't have to be mentally integrated. They're pretty weird and wild and wonderful women and men who were often the virtuosos in non-dual practice. Then the other question is, though, from a teaching point of view, like who do you offer this perspective to? And for me, the important point in this is that you don't. Two things. It's important not to make this attractive, to look attractive. It's important not to package awareness as something that people should have, that they need, that if they have this, then they will have everything they want. Because then people are coming in on the basis of deficiency, on the basis of need. And so that's a tricky business.
Well, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I can see how, you don't want to package it in such a way as to, suggest that if you have awareness, you're going to get the Mercedes and the flashy girlfriend and, all that kind of stuff. But speaking of sort of emotional and psychological abnormalities, isn't the condition of the world a kind of a display of, collective psychological problems on a mass scale? And I've kind of always thought of spiritual development as not only getting established in pure awareness, but kind of getting all your loose screws tightened, and getting all the blind spots and the shadow stuff and the psychological twists and turns that might be disrupting your personal life resolved and healed in the process of your spiritual development. And that, if enough people were to do that, we might see that effect on societal scales.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in the long term, if someone has an initial recognition and that they want to take this to heart, take the non-dual to heart, and work with it and develop it. Yeah, it does require, healing,
could a so-called enlightened?
healing.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it requires healing your mind. It requires working with your mind, perhaps at a psychological level, but just in terms of how you're interacting with people, so you're not creating one drama, one trauma, one breakdown after another, which just throws you further into the conditions, further into samsara, and doesn't let you engage with the practice, the simplicity of just, what is this? This is awareness, and this is what we're doing. Just sitting here in this really uncontrived, settled way.
Yeah, and we might ask, if getting established in your own nature, pure awareness, settled awareness, whatever we want to call it, does not result in you being a better person in some way, if it's just sort of a marinating in my own inner bliss, and then I come out and I act like a jerk, what good is it? It seems to me that I've seen people get very self-indulgent in pursuing spiritual development and actually become less nice as people than the average person, rather than more nice, and that's sometimes a head scratcher.
Right, but I'm not sure that the states that you're talking about is the state of pure awareness, centerlessness, the state that is really embracing, the state that in a way compels us to deal with whatever's arising, the state that doesn't let us retreat from engagement, doesn't let us retreat from complexity. Awareness is the state that's, there's no escape. Whatever's arising, it's there, and has to be worked with and dealt with in whatever way it is. There's no power or energy within awareness that lets us avoid anything.
Good. Yeah. So, you're the psychologist. That's why I'm asking you these questions, because, so are you saying that awareness, it's like light in a way, that it kind of begins to illuminate stuff that might have been hidden from us? Or to use another metaphor, it's like a solvent that begins to dissolve stuff that's been kind of embedded, and that if awareness is developed, then the dark corners of our minds and emotions, or the tight knots of constriction that might be hidden to us, begin to resolve, and life begins to flow more smoothly because we're not carrying around this hidden baggage.
What happens as we become more familiar with awareness, as awareness infuses our being more comprehensively, we become aware of our conditioning in a more subtle way.
Yeah.
We become aware of how we're conditioning things moment by moment. So in relationships, in conversations, there's just more acuity, more sensitivity. We say a sentence, we sense the impact of that. And in Radiant Mind, I talk about working in a way that we are ongoingly complete, so that we're not creating incompletions. So being in the world in a way that we're taking care of what has to be taken care of in the moment, in the here and now. So then in the next moment, we have more possibility, more opportunity of being in that moment, because we don't have to go back and like do repair work
Yeah.
because we were rough and unskillful in communication, in an engagement that we had.
Well, that's a good point. There's a verse in the Gita that says, yoga is skill in action. Yeah. Yoga
Yeah,
karma sukoshalam.
Mm.
And you think of like what Christ said when they were crucifying him, he said, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. I mean, if a person were spiritually aware and, as you say, sensitive and attuned, they wouldn't be able to do a thing like that. You know,
Right.
Yeah. So it would seem that kindness is an outcome of greater spiritual attunement.
Yeah, kindness, care.
Compassion,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
those good things. Okay.
Yeah, and just in relationships, not being manipulative,
Yeah.
being able to have a greater intimacy in relationships, because we're not, trying to manipulate people. There's nothing from our side that we're trying or needing to defend, so we can really let people enter us and let them interact with us.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to just dwell on that a little bit, because sometimes, even in this conversation we've been having, it's sometimes suggested that that spiritual development is sort of intrinsically useful in terms of the subjective experience one has, but it doesn't necessarily have practical implications or applications to one's behavior in daily life. And I don't agree with that, and I think you've articulated nicely how it does have practical implications in terms of being less of a schmuck. And ideally, possibly an even saintly person as time goes on. Now, actually, related to this a little bit, we've been talking about emotions and treating people more kindly, and that being kind of an outcome of being more sensitively attuned to awareness. A more kind of superlative degree of this sort of thing would be devotion. And Elizabeth asks, what is the role of devotion in relation to resting as awareness?
If devotion, I'm just looking at it now. What I enjoy doing is taking a word, hearing a word, like devotion, and just seeing where I can go with that. Taking a word like centerlessness, taking a word like source, Christ consciousness, whatever it would be, and just seeing where I go, what journey how can I move with that? And devotion has something, very sweet. So there's something that I can do with that personally. It's not like there's a right answer to any of these things. I think that we bring to this a great deal of responsibility in terms of how we work with different concepts. Something like devotion, if we can do something that's very sweet and very simple with this, that may be like identified with someone, something, a source of energy, saint, teaching, have devotion to it, that's great. But also just realizing that the devotion here is devotion also to the totality. It's really, I can see devotion working to a lot of what we've been saying, which is this notion of taking care of the totality of our existence so that we can do what we're doing now. What we're doing now, even though it's unconditioned, it is a product of all of the things that we've done and the care that we've taken and the devotion and commitment that we've had to teachings, to the path, to other people. So yeah, devotion. I see devotion, more in a holistic way that can work.
Have you ever been in a relationship with a teacher, let's say, and experienced, real kind of waves of love and devotion, really? I mean, that's a better word than just love because of the kind of the purity of it and the heights to which it can soar.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sweet thing, and I have too. And sometimes there's a sort of a dryness to the way spiritual teachings are presented, but if you kind of look into the heart of them a little bit more, you usually find that these teachers that we revere, Ramana and the Sargadatta and all that, they really had their devotional dimension, and that they themselves lauded that as being something really precious and sweet, not to be missed.
Absolutely.
Here's an interesting question. This again is a little philosophical, I think. Another one from Elizabeth. There's some people who say that since there really is no person essentially at the core of who we are, we're really just pure awareness. That reincarnation doesn't make sense because that would imply a person who somehow reincarnates from body to body. So Elizabeth asks here, what is a mind stream, and what is it that reincarnates from one day to the next, one lifetime to the next, one moment to the next? How, if at all, is reincarnation consistent with a non-dual view?
It's the question comes down, yes, to how do we exist from one day to the next, from one second to the next. It's not only a question of the possibility of there being a continuity from one life to another. If there's no self, how is it that I wake up thinking I'm the same self today as this person who I remember waking up, same environment, same body yesterday? I don't really have an answer for it. I mean, there are a lot of things that I've, thought about and taught and written about, studied. But a stream of consciousness, it's what a person is. It's just a body-mind, the conditioning of which is contained, sort of causally contained in a particular way. And you don't need a self for that to be coherent, for that to function coherently, for it to function and have continuity over time. Question of reincarnations are a little bit different because it sort of assumes a more, what would you say, mentalist, a more that the universe maybe is not as solid as we think it is. It's
In a way, I'm asking you all kinds of metaphysical questions. It's not really fair in a way because we've been talking from the beginning about being true to our own experience, and I'm hitting you with all this stuff that who can really answer for sure. So I apologize for that, and I want to make sure to keep it real here and to keep. Elizabeth is asking some interesting questions, but I want to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity for you to talk about things that are really dear to your heart and that you consider really important for people to hear. So, if I don't bring out some question that and you feel like I wish he'd asked me this, feel free to just throw it out there and start talking about something. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So, is there anything like that's important to you that we've been totally ignoring?
I think we haven't been ignoring it. We've been touching on it, but I think that's just the ease of what we're talking about, and that it is effortless, and that I love the idea of natural state, just the words natural state, because
Yeah.
it works at two levels for me. We have our natural state at the unconditioned level, in which your natural state, everyone who realizes their natural state has awareness, it's like the same realization. And I find it beautiful to think that the saints of the past, Sufism, Advaita, Taoism, Buddhism, when they are resting in awareness, we know what was happening. We know where they were. And for me, being able to draw on the lineage in that way, not just a Buddhist, but the non-dual lineage, and just feel, wow, we are participating in this lineage that's been represented so comprehensively, and that there have been historically hundreds of thousands of people who've, been masters, virtuosos, lived their lives in this state, is really inspiring. Because for many people in the West, it's new, it's what is it, and it's something that is part of our historical heritage to draw on. And then also realizing that, no work, that this is the utmost in simplicity. When you've got, just giving our minds nothing to think about is a beautiful gift for however long we do it. Nothing to work out, nothing to think about, nothing to process. Just like break from the whole thing, just to, yes, and then realizing that there's nothing to do, no work. The doing nothing, doing no thing. And realizing that it is the ultimate medicine, as it's spoken about in Buddhism. The Buddha was the sort of preeminent doctor, teaching the ultimate medicine, and that the words that we use are just not important. Emptiness, self-knowledge, sahaja samadhi. It's and the word that I really go for is this, because it's the word that's
Just
often
the word this.
just this, because it's used in Buddhism. Often, ta, just this. It keeps it simple.
In your own experience, was resting in the natural state something that just sort of grew imperceptibly, like the sun rising very slowly, and it just starts to get a little bit light and a little bit lighter and a little bit lighter, or was there some kind of dramatic shift at some point, which you said, aha, and then you kind of like never went back after that?
No, well, certainly the former, yes, things growing, developing incrementally over the years, and then that being punctuated by, like
Milestones.
something that I would say, particular time and place, particular insight, realizations, whatever happening. I think, oh wow, that was pretty, that was that was a significant milestone, but not something and those things, of course, can take you all the way through, just as we can come all the way through now to presencing awareness, but still regressing from that, still things closing up, still, feeling contracted. So no, I haven't had states that have taken me all the way through and then stabilized beyond that. I think I was trying to clarify that at the beginning.
So, so do you feel like for you the degree to which you rest in the natural state kind of oscillates? Sometimes much more so, sometimes less so, and
yeah.
And so when you feel more constricted, or kind of a little bit like you've lost the natural state to some extent, what do you do to regain it?
The best is to engage in a conversation about it, and that can be a conversation with myself. It can be a conversation with other people, with students, with peers. Writing, I find really great because, when I write, I want to write from this. So that's a great way to come back here. I can read something that I've written that comes from this state, and then it takes me back into it. So that would be the way. So yeah, conversations that are deconstructive, conversations that are designed to take us beyond the mind and bring us back here. Yeah.
Is this conversation doing it?
Yeah. I can, for definitely. Yeah, thank you very much.
Good.
Yeah.
When you're resting in your natural state, most clearly, most profoundly, most deeply, how would you describe that experience?
Well, I think it has the two components, what I was describing, that our natural state as awareness. The other component that's great is natural state can be talking about our conditioned state as well. In other words, just being natural, not feeling contrived, not feeling artificial, not trying to prove anything, not trying to avoid anything, not trying to be, deploying energy, trying to be someone different from how we are. So it's natural at the conditioned level, just being who I am, and the effortlessness that's involved in that, and the naturalness. And in fact, we have to discover ourselves in that way to also allow for the recognition of our natural state in this more profound way. Otherwise, we're just involved in the management of our identity, how people are thinking of me, what do I need to do, just all, how am I, just all of that stuff that we can get so preoccupied with.
It strikes me that a good synonym for natural, the way you're describing it, would be simple. Christ said, except you be as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. So, we think of children as simple and innocent, and the opposite of that being all sort of contriving and complex and, all the stuff that people get caught up in. So, innocent. Innocent. That's another good synonym.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, childlike almost.
Yeah.
Wise as serpents, gentle as doves. And you see that actually in more kind of vividly in certain saints, like Ramana, just kind of sitting there with this sort of look of complete innocence on his face, and gentleness and naturalness, and and then contrast him perhaps with someone in the commodities trading pit at the Chicago Stock Exchange, gives you a good illustration of what natural state looks like.
Yeah.
One thing that people are talking a lot these days is embodiment. There seems to be a trend in contemporary spirituality where a lot of people had some sort of non-dual realization or recognition of their natural state, of their true nature, and but it was not really integrated with their experience as a human being, who has relationships, who has financial challenges, and all kinds of things like that. And so a lot of people these days are talking about embodiment and somehow integrating the self-realization, or whatever you want to call it, into real life. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think if we're doing it in the way that we're doing it now, let's just say a little bit like in the radiant mind way, that the embodiment is happening, because this is not something that's happening separately from everything else in our life. Like, you're in your environment, I'm in my environment, like familiar environment, books, this and that, things that signify different projects and kitchen and all of what have you. So the integration happens through presencing the non-dual in like our regular daily environment and activity. So in a program like Radiant Mind, running over 9 months, a lot of it is happening end on end with what's happening in people's lives. So a lot of the work happens like this, video conferencing, teleconferencing. So people can have just come out of like a difficult conversation with their partner, or come back from work, stressed out and what have you. And then a few minutes later, they're on the phone, presencing awareness, like making the journey, but still with an awareness of the context of their lives. So the integration is happening by being, so there's no segmentation happening. Like you don't have to segment yourself and sort of compartmentalize yourself in a particular way to be here. So this for me is how the embodiment doesn't, you can't like take awareness and, shove it into our body, push it into relationships. It comes through being open, not being closed. And as I said, when we're aware, real awareness, we can't close down anyway. We're compelled to be open. So I think what's happening is the emphasis on embodiment is describing an integrated practice of awareness, basically.
Yeah.
It's describing, and that's more and more what people are looking for in the West, an integrated practice, not one that you head off to India and you go to Nepal or the Himalayas or wherever and you hang out there for a few months doing a retreat, which is great. I think that is really excellent. And I think that's integrated too. I don't see that as being unintegrated. There you're integrating with stuff that wouldn't come up if you weren't sitting with yourself for a few months. So I overall, I just think it's great what everyone is doing. I just think it's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And I don't find myself being critical and thinking, oh, that's not so good, they should be doing this. I think that just so much energy and application and interest that we find these days in spirituality, the non-dual Buddhism, it's all wonderful.
Well, yeah, I agree. I wasn't criticizing those people who are talking about embodiment. I think it's long overdue, and there was too much disembodied talk, going on for a while, and that could only last so long, because life smacks you in the face. In your case, you were like a celibate monk in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions for 9 years. Were you like in monasteries in over there in Tibet or someplace?
No,
India?
in India, but more in Australia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then was there a bit of a reintegration period that was a little difficult for you after those 9 years?
The transition was very difficult.
Yeah.
Then that took about a year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the transition, because it was a transition from a system that in a profound way had supported me. Really supported me.
Yeah.
And
shelter.
so I was, really indebted to what I received from it.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't simple, but it seemed necessary. It seemed it was going to be pulled apart anyway, in part maybe in order to do what I have been doing in the last couple of decades in terms of, discovering and then offering something that's more secular, not overtly Buddhist based, and, has a wider spread to it.
Right, yeah. So you had a preparatory phase, and then you had to come out in the world and do your thing. Someone named Doug sent in a question just now. He said, how does happiness relate to the resting in awareness? This is the second part of the question. He said, sometimes it appears meditators appear to be more paranoid and of high anxiety than the rest of the populace. Why is that? I would say that sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but I see his point. Why would that be, do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't see that.
You don't?
Maybe them being more
High
I mean,
anxiety.
meditators can get a little bit nervous about, like, if they're holding on to their meditative state, if they're wanting to, then it can easily feel threatened, sure. And then, I mean.
I guess the way I'd phrase it is sometimes it seems that, people who are really into spiritual stuff are kind of obsessive, idiosyncratic, kind of nutty sometimes. And I've often wondered, are nutty people attracted to spirituality, or does spirituality make you nutty? And yet that's not a total generalization, because there are all kinds of wonderful, bright, clear people. But it does seem, or maybe it's just a cross-section of the general population. And you'd find that anywhere, spiritual and non-spiritual.
Yeah, it's, I don't have enough experience to, to really, I don't know.
Okay.
The people that, I don't know what to say.
Well, I don't know is a perfectly good answer,
Okay, the first part, the happiness, all I've really got to say there is that, obviously the non-dual is different from feeling happy, because happiness is something that comes and goes. It's a conditioned state, and I think it's great. I mean, happy is being healthy. The more happiness we have, the better, but it's not the final goal, final objective. And if it becomes the final objective, it begins to produce suffering. We become attached to it and then suffer when we lose it.
Well, it also sort of depends on what we mean by happiness, doesn't it? I mean, there's kind of relative transitory happiness that's based upon the condition of our physiology or what we're experiencing. And then there's that ground of awareness we've been talking about, which is kind of said to be intrinsically blissful, and which, but I mean, this is worth dwelling on for a second, and that is that it may be intrinsically blissful, but who experiences that bliss other than a being such as ourselves? And it seems that our capacity to experience is always going to be somewhat vulnerable and fluctuating. I mean, when Ramana was screaming in pain when he was dying of cancer, was he experiencing bliss underneath that pain? Or, I mean, when people said to him, "Oh, we're so sorry that you're suffering like this," he would say, "I'm not suffering." So perhaps it is possible to achieve a state in which, despite outward appearances to the contrary, one resides in a field that is untouched by relative, pain and pleasure and whatnot, just established in equanimity, regardless of whether you're burning in fire or getting a nice oil massage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's what we are discovering for ourselves, that possibility.
Yeah.
And occasionally we can break through to that, finding that something that's intensely painful can become transformed, does become transformed, maybe just for a few seconds, into something that's blissful, but then quickly, like a rubber band, it just snaps back into an experience of pain. But for me, the most important thing is being really appreciative of what we already have, and not sort of racing ahead too quickly into how things might be, but really appreciating that we have the recognition of awareness, the most profound recognition that's possible for any human being. So that's happened. I mean, that is incredible, marvelous. It is rare. It doesn't happen to everyone. So that recognition has happened. We've got, like, the marker. We know what it is without any doubt or dispute, and that it's become an integral part of our lives. We're living our lives in order to develop and grow this. So there's nothing more to do. I mean, that's what we're doing, sort of as much as can be done. If we were trying harder, we'd be doing something else. It wouldn't be this. It would be, being caught by our desires, our need to suffer less, our need to whatever. So really appreciating what we have already accomplished, and having someone mentioned confidence, Elizabeth, that, and the confidence is there at this point. It's great when you arrive at the point that we know that we can be confident that we can't let go of this, that this has sort of got us, and it's going to be with us at least for the rest of this life. And it's not just something that we've picked up and looked at and played around with a little bit and said, that was fun and that was interesting, but we'll move on to something else. No, we've sort of gone beyond that, and that's a really wonderful state to have achieved.
Yeah, and you used the word rare a minute ago. It has been relatively rare, given the 8 billion people in the world, what percentage of people are having the kind of experience we're talking about. But I do find it kind of inspiring and hopeful that it seems to be becoming more and more commonplace. That, whereas 2,000 years ago you had to be a spiritual Superman to have the kind of breakthrough that these days, people are having all over the place. There seems to be some kind of popcorn effect going on, some kind of epidemic effect that I think bodes well for the future of humanity, hopefully.
Yeah.
And it's great that people like you are playing their part in helping to bring that about.
And wonderful that you are profiling so many people and doing what you're saying. But both that you're bringing the sophistication of the conversation that you are in your sessions. I really appreciate that. That the sophistication, you're right, at the edge of where the conversation is and needs to be, and that you're able to profile so many people who are sharing awareness, sharing their experience of it, is a testament to what you're saying.
Well, I really enjoy doing it, and I realize that there are a lot of people out there that really I would love to talk to and that deserve to be on this show, and that people would like to get exposed to, and I just do as many as possible, which so far is one a week. I hope to eventually increase the frequency, but I still have somewhat of a day job and other things going on. But for me, this has been a lifelong interest, not just not just sort of a curiosity, but really a passion, and I've devoted literally hours a day to focused application of this interest, and and it's been very fulfilling for me. It's brought me from being a very kind of unhappy, confused, mixed up kid to pretty happy guy. And I use the word happiness sort of tritely, but it's a lot more than that, obviously. So it's an honor to be able to have conversations with people like you and all the people that I talk to every week. It's a real joy for me, and it's a joy to be. I sometimes have the thought that in our own ways, each of us is kind of a tool of the divine. I like to think of it that way. That beautiful prayer by Saint Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, and it goes on to where there is sadness, let me sow happiness, or however the poem goes. And I've kind of always wanted to embody that sentiment ever since I was a teenager, just to sort of make my life be kind of a contribution to the world as much as
Yeah.
I could make it. You know what I mean? I bet you feel
Yeah.
that way too.
Yeah. I feel that we're all doing our little bit. There is a phenomenon of the wisdom of the East coming to the West, and there's so much to be done. All of the little bits and pieces, and you're doing what you're doing, and it's not a matter of who's doing it. Am I doing the right thing? But we're all doing our bit,
Yeah.
and we're all, I feel, sort of a product of the ages, our ages, a product of who we are. And if I wasn't doing this, someone would be doing effectively the same thing. It's not personal. We're all doing the bit, whatever's assigned to us, and doing that as best we can. Karma, desireless action, without getting focused on the results of our work.
There's a cool story in one of the Vedic scriptures, I think it might be the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Indra became jealous of Krishna because Krishna had all these devotees in Vrindavan who loved him so much, and Indra felt like, oh, you know, who's he? I mean, what about me? And so he started to pour down all this rain on the village, and just it was inundating the village, and everybody was going to drown. And so all the devotees of Krishna prayed to him to save them, and he just took this mountain and lifted it up and held it above the village as an umbrella, you know, with one hand. And then after a while, the villagers thought, well, that's a very heavy mountain. You know, we better help him. So they all grabbed sticks and held them up to sort of hold the mountain up so it wouldn't strain Krishna's wrist or something. And they all felt like they were doing something. But of course, it was Krishna doing it. It wasn't them.
Yeah.
So you know, you and I and all of us were just kind of holding up our sticks.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. So is there anything else? I'm sure there, I mean, usually after I hang up from these interviews, I think, oh, I wish I'd asked that. Is there anything that, you know, you feel like you want to throw in there before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I just appreciation. That's the word, appreciation for everyone who's holding up the stick, everyone who's helping in this profound movement. That's that really will be, already is, important part of human history. And appreciating all of it. How when we began, it wasn't quite as easy to make the connections, and it was often a bit of a struggle to so there's already been an amazing contribution over 40 years. So acknowledging everyone and acknowledging how it moves forward from here, and how it's through your work and so on really diffusing much more widely into the population.
And so if people want to plug in more to what you're doing, participate in some way with what you're offering, what is there they can do?
Just to a website, I guess the easiest website to remember, which will take them to 3 or 4 websites that we have, is wisdom.org, is the easiest one to remember, wisdom.org.
Okay. And I'll be linking to that, of course, from your page on batgap.com. So wisdom.org. And then what kind of things would they find if they, I mean, you're in Australia.
I think the audios that Sounds True produced, people really enjoy them. I have people, that I meet and say, wow, I've been listening to your audios for a year. And I go, what? I mean, that's, how do you do that? You know, that's fantastic. And, they say it's everything from it. They've helped me sleep. They've helped me, drink less. They've, really helped me on my path. So I thought it's all non-dual, but it seems to have something more in it than just a non-dual. So I would say, the audio, and then there are conference calls that a lot of them come out of Portland that people can connect to. So if they email wisdom.org, I will get them onto Portland calls. I do video calls. I'm not sure when I'll be back in the US. I also do an advanced program, Natural Awakening, which is teaching people how to do the type of non-dual transmission that I do. That's what I put a lot of work into in recent years, more teaching teachers, teaching facilitators.
Is all this stuff done in person, like or you do it remotely?
It's based on 3 workshops. That particular course runs over 10 months, 3 4-day workshops, and then a lot of other components, what we call a non-dual coaching lab, designed by my wife. So that's like a intense process that we do in person and by phone, small groups, conference calls, projects that people work on.
Okay, so it sounds like people can go to your website and explore all the possibilities. Some of it may involve flying to Australia or something, but others is going to be over the phone or Skype or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And you come to the States once in a while too, don't you? Or Europe.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, there's I should mention that there's a page on BatGap under the past interviews section, which it has like geographic locations or something, and you'll be adding information there. But if you type in a location such as London, you'll automatically see a list of the teachers who are going to be doing something in London or who come there regularly, and then you can go to their websites to get the details and what they might be doing. So we'll have you put in your information on that. All right. Well, thanks, Peter. Really appreciate spending some time with you.
Yeah.
And we'll probably run into each other in person one of these days.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I look forward to that. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. Let me make just a couple of general wrap-up points. So I've been speaking with Peter Fenner, and I think you must know that by now. And this interview has been one in an ongoing series, and we have them planned well into the future. I hope to continue doing this for many years, so I love doing it, and it seems to be beneficial for people. If you want to explore the archives of ones that have been done, go to batgap.com, look under the past interviews menu, and you'll see them organized in 4 or 5 different ways. And then there's also a future interviews menu, which shows what's upcoming. And there's a donate button, which I appreciate people clicking if they can to help support this. There's a place to sign up for email notification of each new interview. There's an audio podcast and a link, a page dedicated to various ways to sign up for that, and a bunch of other stuff if you explore the menus. There's even like a ringtone for your cell phone if you want to download it. Next week it's going to be Bonnie Greenwell, who has written a couple of books about Kundalini and has been through a whole lot of experiences herself, and then made that her life's focus to understand Kundalini, and has interviewed thousands of people who have had all kinds of Kundalini awakenings. So that should be interesting, because I get emails from people saying, "What is happening to me? I can't sleep. My legs are thrashing. I feel like I'm having seizures or something, but I know it's not that." And so this is something that probably one should have in one's collection of understanding in case one encounters it. And it's an interesting topic. So that's what we'll do next week. So thanks for listening or watching. Thanks again, Peter.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And we'll see you all next week.
Okay. Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.